Hello, beautiful people. Today I'm going to share with you what I read in October. I'll let you know what you should skip, what is worth a read, and stay until the end to see all of the 5-star reads that I read in October. If you are new to my channel, hi, I'm April. You can think of me as your bookish fairy godmother. On this channel, my goal is to help you find your next 5-star read. And these are just a few of the 5-star reads that live rent-free in my head. If you like what you see, I hope you'll subscribe, hit the bell, stay a while. And for those of you who have been around on this channel for a while, hello. You might notice that I changed my name from Getting Hygge With It just to my name. I realized I don't really do a lot of hygge, cozy kinds of things on my channel, and the books that I read are not necessarily cozy whatsoever. So I thought, time to just change the name up. Hope you guys are okay with that. Let's get into the reads. So I read 12 books in October, and 4 of them are 5-star reads for me. Let's start with the books that I think you should skip. I ended up DNFing How to Raise Successful People. I was interested in this book in the first place because this author, raised some very, very successful daughters. One of them is the CEO of YouTube. She recently passed away, very sadly. The other is the CEO of 23andMe. We don't know what's going on with that company, but her daughter is a successful CEO. And, you know, I would, of course, like to raise Nora to be successful, yes, but also more importantly, like independent and self-driven. That's really my goal for Nora. And I thought this book would do that. It didn't really have any tricks in this book. And there was a lot of references to her as a college professor teaching her students. And I just think that the dynamic between teacher and student is very different than the dynamic of like mother and child. So this didn't work for me. I ended up DNFing it because I wasn't getting anything from it that I needed. I also think you could probably skip Feel Good Productivity, How to Do More of What Matters to You by Ali Abdaal. This was sent to me by the publishers. I read it. I did highlight through it, but I found as it was going on, I wasn't getting anything new from it. Now I will say, I read a lot of self-help books. So if you are new to the self-help genre, maybe this could be of interest to you, but I really didn't find anything new here, so I just don't think it's worth a read. Another book I think you could skip is The Death of Jane Lawrence by Caitlin Starling. This was also sent to me by the publisher. I had so many high hopes for this book. It started off well. This follows a woman named Jane. She is living in a time, I think it takes place in the 1800s. She's living in a time where women are very much reliant on men. She decides that she wants to have a marriage of convenience. And so she actually finds her man. His name is Dr. Augustine. And she basically proposes to him and he agrees. But he says to her, I'll marry you, but you can never visit Lindridge Hall. You'll have to stay in town at my doctor's quarters. She agrees. But of course, on their wedding night, something happens that drives her to Lindridge Hall. There's a terrible storm outside and she has no choice but to stay. This started out so well. It's very much an ode to Gothic literature, and it felt like that. It felt dark and foreboding at the beginning, but then it just dragged on. Like it's not a super long book, but it definitely could have been half that length. I didn't end up liking it, and I just wanted it to be over towards the end, which makes me very sad. But what I do think is worth a read is Midnight on Beacon Street by Emily Ruth Verona. This takes place in October. It's 1993. We follow a girl named Amy. She is going to a house to babysit these 2 kids for a single mom. The single mom is going out on a date, I believe, and she is there to babysit. Over the course of an evening, she has visitors, unexpected visitors, and very much unwanted visitors, there are strange phone calls, and she's just trying to be a good babysitter and protect these kids. Now, she knows that these kids have gone through traumatizing times. By the end of this night, she too will be a newly traumatized child. I mean, she is in her teens. She's still a child. She'll be traumatized too. I loved that there was an homage to the movie Halloween. It feels like a very similar setup. And Amy is a big fan of horror movies, and she, throughout this book, is trying to sit down and watch Halloween. But then things start reflecting a little bit, and she has to turn it off. That said, I didn't think there was a ton of depth to this book. It is not as scary as Halloween, but it is a really good book. It got fairly bad reviews on Goodreads, and I don't really understand why. Perhaps people were expecting it to be scarier than it was, but I, for one, really enjoyed it. Now, another book that I would recommend to you is Marking Time by Elizabeth Jane Howard. This is the second book in the Cazalet Chronicles. It's a World War II series of books. I think there's 5 books. I could be wrong. But yes, it's World War II, and we follow a fairly enormous family. They're all English. We've got 3 brothers who seem to help run a company. Now, 2 of them are working on that, going in and out of London during World War II, which, as you know, can be quite dangerous. One of them is actually at war. And then we follow their children, their wives in the English countryside, and we particularly follow their daughters. In the first book, their daughters were children, and war was on its way, but not quite here yet. In this book, we see them really starting to grow up. They're all teenagers. One of them has decided she wants to be an actress. Louise very much avoids thinking about the war too seriously. Then we have Clary, who is quite obsessed with how her father is doing during the war because he is at war. And then Polly, who is kind of the glue, I would say the calm one of the 3 of them. She's trying to hold her family together, all the while her mother being quite ill. I love this series. I am going to be reading book 3 in November. Yes, highly recommend this whole series. Next, we've got Nightbitch, which is comical horror at the same time. This follows a woman, a mother, who believes she's becoming a dog. This book I really appreciated because it explores motherhood and how easily women can be stripped of their power, especially at the beginning of motherhood. And we follow this woman as she becomes a dog, really scrap and scrape to get that power back. I will say I hated the husband in this book. I was worried about her because woohoo, but I really hated the husband. He is extremely annoying. You can't read this and not want to just slap him in the face a little bit. Next up is a parenting book that I would recommend with some warnings. This is Parenting with Love and Logic, Teaching Children Responsibility. Now, this book is very anti-helicopter parenting, which I can sometimes find myself doing. This is also anti-telling your children what to do and much more about giving children choices, but also allowing them to deal with the consequences of those choices. I don't know if any of you guys are moms out there. The whole gentle parenting thing, I love some of it, and I find it very difficult at the same time. So this is kind of a happy medium to me. I highlighted the heck out of this book. I created notes from this book, and I find it really is helping me connect with Nora better and giving her some power over her own life, because as this book says, as they get older, they're only going to want more and more power. So how do you navigate that? The caveat for this is twofold. Number one, there are things in this book that they say that they encourage doing that I just would never do. ever. Just that's not safe. The helicopter parent, I guess, within me just wouldn't do some of these things. And also there's a section in here that's like about spanking, and they're like, we don't believe in spanking anymore. I'm like, what? But was this written in the 1800s? So I guess the first edition, they had a different perspective on spanking. So like that was a bit weird. The other thing that I find kind of a shame is like, it's just peppered with Christianity chat in here. There's a lot of scripture quotes and that kind of thing. And I just think that you end up alienating a lot of people who are agnostic or atheist or Muslim or Jewish, Hindu. Like, you alienate a lot of people doing that, I think. So I didn't appreciate that. That said, it's really helping me. So I would read it. Another book, 100% worth the read, is A Talent for Murder by Peter Swanson. This is the third book in a series that starts with The Kind Worth Killing. I love this whole series. Here we meet a woman who believes that her husband might be a serial killer. He is a traveling salesman, and one day she is washing his clothes and discovers a blood stain on a shirt. And then she starts looking into the times that he is traveling for work and starts seeing murders that have happened that she thinks might be linked to her husband. She thinks her husband is who has killed these women. Now she reaches out to an old college friend who she hasn't spoken to for a while, named Lily. We know Lily from books 1 and 2. And Lily starts to investigate. What I love about these books is there is still some humor in the books. I really care about the characters. Lily, I truly do care for. I hope this book, like the series, just goes on and on and on, because I will read every single one of them. Whatever he writes, honestly, I will read, but I love this series in particular. Are we ready for the 5-star read? First up, we have None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. I had given up on Lisa Jewell, and then I read this book and it changed my mind, and now I'm going to pick up more by her. This follows two characters, a podcaster named Alex and a listener named Josie. They meet one night at a restaurant on their birthdays. They're birthday twins. Now Josie pitches to Alex that she should do a podcast episode about Josie, about someone who hasn't changed her life yet, but is on the precipice of doing that. And Alex agrees. She starts interviewing her. All is going well. However, Josie's life has been fairly horrific and very worrisome. And then Josie disappears. And this podcast turns into a true crime podcast, which was not the plan. It was not Alex's plan whatsoever. But here we are. I personally loved that we had a cast of characters in their 40s. I really did enjoy that. I was absolutely hooked and needed to know what was going to happen. There were so many twists and turns. I was just glued. I was glued and could not put this book down. Trespasses by Louise Kennedy is next. We meet a Catholic school teacher in Ireland. We're dealing with the Troubles. So she is a teacher by day. At night, she works for her family pub. And that is where she meets Michael. Michael has baggage. He's a barrister, but he is also married. And she starts dating him, and you watch her fall more and more in love with him. This is a slow burn book. The Troubles in and of itself is almost a character in its own right. The Troubles is on everyone's mind, in the back of everyone's mind, and yet they're still trying to go ahead and have their own lives. But then 75% of the way through this book, everything is turned on its head. Everything in our main character's life is just thrown up in the air. I will say I usually don't like it when we have a slower start to a book and then a twist happens at the end and the plot ramps up at the end. That said, this is kind of the exception to that rule. It really is worth the wait. It's the kind of book that you'll end the book and want to read it all over again from the beginning with a new perspective in mind. I loved this book. Another 5-star read is The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. This is a new release, and I got a hold of the audiobook version, and it was really fantastic. This follows a summer camp and people at the summer camp. It's the summer of 1975, and a camp member, goer, has gone missing. She's a teenage girl. Her name is Barbara, and she's not the first to have gone missing at this summer camp. Her own brother went missing before she was even born, and he was never found again. So we've got 2 mysteries happening simultaneously, and you're going back and forwards in time with different perspectives. And I just have to say how difficult it is, I imagine, as an author to do that kind of thing, to weave that kind of web and yet have it all come together at the end. I was really, really impressed by this book, and I was completely hooked. And last but not least, this is my favorite book of the month. It's The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I gave this an easy 5 stars. If this could be 6 stars, I would give it 6 stars. I listened to this on audio, which I highly recommend because he narrates it himself and he has just a beautiful voice. Now, in this book, we follow the author on his travels. He goes to Senegal, South Carolina, and then he goes to the West Bank in Palestine. His book is everywhere in part because of a disastrous interview on CBS Morning, excuse me. I will link that in the description box below. And I'll also link a couple of really interesting interviews that he's done since that disastrous interview, because I just find him very fascinating. Everyone who interviews him and just generally seems to hone in on the Palestine portion of his book. But it's just one of a part of the whole book. They do all interlink, but it's just one of a part. So he explores a US South that doesn't want to recognize its racist past and its racist present. It's a place where his books have been banned when teachers have tried to read his books with their children. They've been banned, and he goes to visit these schools and explore why. He goes to Senegal to really come to grips with the slave trade. And also, while he's in Senegal, he also confronts the idea of the Afrocentric dream. And then he goes to Israel and Palestine, and he explores a country that has its own Jewish, ethnic, religious state. He really does explore the horror that led them to creating that state. He, absolutely dives into the Holocaust and the horrors of the Holocaust. But then he looks at the flip side of how a state could be created and exists on the shoulders of apartheid. As Coates is exploring all of this stuff, he comes to the conclusion that he doesn't believe in an ethnic state, like anywhere on earth. And it really helped me explore my own perspective, in which I don't really believe in a religious state anywhere on earth. I don't think that that should be a thing. I really believe in the separation of church and state, of course, upholding the importance of citizens being able to maintain religious freedom. I think that's incredibly important. I've watched some horror things happening in Quebec where they've tried to separate church and state, but it seems like only Muslim people are not allowed to wear hijabs. They're still able to wear the crosses. That's another conversation, but they're trying to do this separation of church and state, but not allowing religious freedom, which is extremely problematic. But it got me thinking a lot about how when a country is so invested in a particular religion and imposes that religion on its citizens, it doesn't allow room for growth. It doesn't allow for people to make different decisions, change religions, decide to leave a religion. There's a lot of problems to that. And it upholds this idea of like, if you believe a certain thing, you're right and you're good and you have certain privileges. And if you believe another thing, you're lesser than and maybe need to be changed. And it really got me thinking about Canada and our Indigenous peoples and the horrors that they have gone through and still go through because of this Christian notion that we are right and we are helping them. They created residential schools and shaved the heads of Indigenous people who hold their hair dear. And they shaved their heads. They forced them to change their clothing from traditional Indigenous clothing to, you know, a suit, basically, a little uniform. And there's this audacity that we're doing this to make them better because they believe that Christianity, for example, is better than Indigenous knowledge. And it's just horrific. At the end of the day, it just ends up being horrific. I don't know of a place that's really worked well. Like when I think about radical Islamic regimes in Iran, in Afghanistan, we have women who have been robbed of their rights. And that's not working well, is it? It just doesn't seem to work well anywhere. So this book really got me thinking, really got me exploring my own perspective, which is very much in line with Ta-Nehisi Coates, but also slightly separate. And I'm still kind of mulling over things. I'm just chatting with you here, but still mulling it all over. But that was definitely by far the best book that I read in October. Highly recommend that. So those are all of the books that I read in October. I'd love to know in the comments below, what was your favorite book from October? I hope that you are doing well, and I will talk with you soon. Bye!